Live and direct. Shout out to everybody in the live chat. Let me know if you can hear me loud and clear. We are live and direct. Big up James Clifford, David Fisher, June Sports, Truth Channel, Julius, Little Jacob, J Manchester, Solid Snake, Supersized Fries, Andrew, Joe, Fault Line, Charles B, No Caller ID, Ruz B, KD, Trance, Connor William, Hyperspaz, WPW, Dominica, Sackend, Fault Line, Afro Soul. Shout out to Afro Jam. Last one. Big up. Fernie G in the house. Yeah, we did the 80s on the first of these retro streams. Then we did the very early 90s with the Street Fighter thumbnail last time. This time, what are we in? Mid-90s? Or is it early 2000s? When did Metal Gear Solid 3 come out? Late 90s? Because Metal Gear Solid 1 must have come out on PS1, right? That was mid-90s. So when did Metal Gear Solid 3 come out? Let's see if we got any old school gamers in the house. Afro Soul says, Hatman, have you seen that recent Atama interview on DAZN's YouTube channel? The one where he spoke about a message he got on Instagram from Chris Eubank Jr.? Yeah, I did just see that. Okay, Afro Jam says, somebody says 1999. Someone else says 2004. Another person says 2005. Let's have a look. Let me look it up. It came out originally on the PS2. Okay, yeah, 2004 is when it came out. 2004 in North America and Japan, and 2005 in Europe and Australia. So we're in the early 2000s with this one. So we've done a decade each, right? The first one was 80s. Actually, no, the first one was 90s too. Because Streets of Rage 2 came out in the 90s. So we've got all 90s, not even 80s. But the music was more 80s sounding. All right, so we got some boxing to talk about. Now, the picture is not random. All of the pictures that I've done so far for these retro thumbnails, I've actually used a picture of myself as a reference image, and then I let the AI do its thing. And this is what it comes up with. It somewhat looks like me. It's not an exact likeness, but it's somewhat like me. Yeah, got to put a pause on it, Rich Franklin. It does sound mad suspect when you say it like that. James Clifford says, with Metal Gear Solid having to plug in the PS controller into the other slot to defeat Psycho Mantis was class. Yeah, the Metal Gear Solid games did a lot of stuff like that. They catch you off guard with all sorts of cheeky tricks and what have you. Yeah, Metal Gear Solid 1 was one of my favorites. I remember playing that on PS1. All right, so let's talk about some boxing here. How many of you guys saw Terra Moana's fight? Was it earlier on today or was it yesterday? I saw the rerun on YouTube. So Terra Moana fought this dude, DeAndre Savage. DeAndre Savage had a record which you can see on screen. Only one loss. That loss was to Brandon Moore. Brandon Moore, as you can see from this box rec listing, was knocked out by Richard Torres Jr., just to give you guys some context. So Terra Moana's opponent was beaten by a guy that was knocked out by Richard Torres. I know that's not always indicative of how good a fighter is, but Brandon Moore has done nothing else, I can assure you, other than be knocked out by the guy that was knocked out by Richard Torres. Excuse me, Brandon Moore's done nothing but DeAndre Savage, I'm getting all confused, has done nothing but get knocked out or beaten, outpointed by the guy who was knocked out by Richard Torres. Long story short, Brandon Moore is no great shakes whatsoever. That's putting it mildly. That's putting it politely. Eddie Hearn, after the fight, I'm not sure how many of you guys saw this, was saying that Terra Moana is going to need another 5 or 6 fights before challenging for a heavyweight title. Now, that's the kind of thing I'm saying if you are 21 and you're 12 fights in or 11 fights in. Yeah, 5 or 6 more fights at least before challenging for the heavyweight title. It's not the kind of thing I'm saying when you're 28. When you're a former Olympian, the level of opposition he's fighting is absolutely shocking for a guy this age with that type of experience. Needs to move it on and do it quick. And even more shockingly, Eddie Hearn actually mentioned Brandon Moore, the guy that beat DeAndre Savage in his only defeat, as Terra Moana's next opponent. What are you trying to do to us here, Eddie? What are you trying to do to Terra Moana? You know, Eddie Hearn's very good with the gift of the gab, selling stuff, even selling the dream to the fighters. But stuff like this is not helping Terra Moana. You know, if he was struggling, if he was getting wobbled, if he was getting clipped all over the place, cool, keep him at this level, get him to iron out some of those issues, then move him up. But he's not having any issues. So what is going on? Are they hiding some type of weakness with Terra Moana, moving him this slow at this age? Indeed, Afro Jam. Savage didn't want to be there, and he wasn't in shape. That's a good shout, Fault Line. Yes, Terra Moana versus Vianello. Now, Vianello did just sign to Queensbury, but Matchroom and Queensbury have got a pretty good relationship these days, so it shouldn't be an insurmountable obstacle. I can't imagine that Frank Warren has signed Guido Vianello to be a priority. I have to imagine he signed him as an opponent for some of his other heavyweights. Yeah. DeAndre Savage was terrible, fat, scared. His eyes were popping out of his head. Trained and managed by Tony Harrison, the boxer, the 154-pounder. Afro Jam says Hearn is taking the P. Harrison was mocking Hearn in the press conference. I didn't actually see that. Yeah, the opponent was terrible. Now, Eddie Hearn is saying none of the Australian fighters will face Terra Moana. So what? Since when did you have to limit yourself to Australian fighters? Get Terra Moana out of Australia and have him fight somebody in the UK. I mean, he's never going to become a massive earning fighter if he stays in Australia anyway. Maybe you make him a big earner outside of Australia, then you bring him back there. But if they keep him in Australia, he's never going to become a massive global star. So get him out of Australia now, get him fighting on some of those UK cards, and match him appropriately. Afro Soul says, Terry Moana's lack of speed is my only concern about him so far. You know what? In this fight, I thought he actually looked pretty quick in terms of the hand speed. He's not a Joe Joyce guy. He's not. In fact, I would say Terry Moana in terms of hand speed is faster than Hrgovic. Hrgovic is not slow-handed. He's just kind of average or slightly above average hand speed. I thought Terry Moana's hand speed was pretty good, to be honest. User says Terry Moana himself didn't even want to call out any names. Yeah, that's disappointing. Connor Williams says there's no good Aussie heavyweights. Hearn is tripping. Well, the only Aussie heavyweights I can think of are Justice Hooney and Dempsey McKean. Unless you want to dig up Lucas Brown. Lucas Brown, did he lose in bare knuckle recently? Connor Williams says he's going to be fighting rugby players if he stays in Australia. Dave P says, Terry Moana versus David Adalai. Good shout, question mark. Depends on who David Adalai signs with. I mean, I'd like to see the fight, but Adalai says that he has come to the end of his contract with Frank Warren and he won't be renewing. He intends to sign with somebody else. Will it be Eddie Hearn? Will it be Zuffa? Will it be somebody else? If it's Hearn, then yeah, I guess the Terry Moana fight becomes a possibility. That's right, Koppen. Hrgovic has good accuracy rather than speed. James Clifford says, besides AJ, Matchroom really doesn't have a credible track record in developing heavyweight prospects into contenders. So yeah, that's Terry Moana. You know, as for the performance, he was up against the heavy bag. And okay, looking impressive on a heavy bag is cool, but heavy bags don't hit back. And that's what it was. And it's not like he iced DeAndre Savage or anything. He hit him with a shot, and Savage looked like he quit on the floor. He wanted no parts. So we'll move on from Terry Moana. Some people wanted my take on Hamza Shiraz and his last performance against the German. There's a lot of theories flying around. Hamza Shiraz was unmotivated. Was he possibly injured again? I think the situation with Shiraz, why he looks good in some fights and not so good in others, is actually very, very simple. I think people are overthinking it and overcomplicating it. I'm not saying that the factors that they're bringing up aren't contributing to some of his performances not being great, but I don't think they are the main reason. I think the main reason why Hamza Shiraz looked poor in his last fight and poor against Carlos Adames, rather than being weight drained and, underestimating people, having a broken hand, etc., etc. No, I think the primary reason that Shiraz looked poor in those two fights, and not only those two fights, I'm going to mention another one in a second after I make my point. The primary reason, in my opinion, is because he just can't deal with movement. Some guys are like that. Some guys don't have the level of hand-eye coordination and depth perception and spatial awareness necessary to deal with a guy who moves his head a lot or moves his feet a lot. I think it's just that simple. Now, I should put a caveat on it and say they have to have decent movement or pretty good movement, because there is a difference between somebody that moves and somebody that moves well. The opponent that he fought to win the title, that guy moved, but he didn't move well. Whereas the previous guy moved pretty well, and Carlos Adames moves very well, primarily head movement with Adames. He wasn't running around the ring or anything, but he was moving his head a lot, and Hamza Shiraz just couldn't get to grips with the target. I think it's just as simple as that. And to bolster my point, go back and look at the Bradley Skeet fight years ago. He struggled like crazy against Skeet because why? Skeet was moving about. I think it's just that simple with Shiraz. If you put him in there against the guy that's going to stand right in front of him and barely move his head and just try to slug it out, Shiraz is going to look good against most of those kind of guys. Whereas if you put him in there with a guy who has good head movement or good foot movement or both, he's going to struggle. Wow. Mitch says DeAndre Savage used to be managed by Chris Lovejoy and trained alongside him. That's all you need to know. That's crazy. Chris Lovejoy trains people? Shout out to Jade. Yeah, I've addressed that at a George Foreman controversy in a video that I uploaded a couple of days ago. Also addressed it in at least my last stream, maybe the one before that as well. So we've been over that. Afro Jam says, even before he KO'd Berlanga, Shiraz was getting outboxed. Yeah, any kind of movement is kryptonite to Hamza Shiraz. If a guy's got decent movement, head movement, foot movement, it throws him off completely. He can't, it throws his accuracy off. He can't adjust to movement. That's just what it is. You have to stand right in front of him. I think people are overthinking it, talking about, oh, he wasn't motivated and this and that. Nah, man. I reckon this is going to be a reoccurring theme in Hamza Shiraz's career. It's just a case of styles make fights. How do I think he would do against the William Skull? I think William Skull's been bodied recently, right? He got knocked out badly by some German guy that actually also wants to fight Hamza Shiraz. Isn't it that guy that wants to fight Shiraz that knocked Skull out badly? So I don't know if Skull is the same now as he was prior to that. But if it's the Skull that fought Canelo, for example, I think he gives Shiraz loads of problems. Wouldn't be a very entertaining fight. William Skull's a runner, but Jacob Bank, yeah, that's the guy. All right, let's move on from this. We will talk about the interview with Moses Atauma that just dropped on the DAZN Boxing YouTube channel earlier on today. And I don't want to criticize for the sake of criticizing and be mean or anything, but the dude that interviewed him, he's really not my cup of tea. Do you know what I mean? As an interviewer, a presenter, and all that kind of stuff. He just comes across as really wishy-washy, weak, and just not up to scratch. I don't know how he's got the gig, being an interviewer and a presenter and all that kind of thing, because I just don't see any talent there. And I find wishy-washy people like that just very annoying. Very, very annoying. Also don't like the fact he's got a nose piercing. That annoys the hell out of me as well. But anyway, the interview with Moses Atauma, he was asking generic media questions, which is another thing that annoys me. And it seemed to be annoying Hatman a little bit as well. That's why Hatman doesn't answer the questions the way that the interviewers want him to answer them, you know? Because they're silly, generic media questions. The only interesting thing really that came from the interview was some information that Hatman offered at the very end, where he said that he was messaged on Instagram by Chris Eubank Jr. after he'd praised his trainer Ben Davison. Right? Somebody asked Hatman, what do you owe your success to so far? And he said, the Ben Davison Performance Academy. Is that what the gym is called? And that prompted Chris Eubank Jr. to message him and say words to the effect of, don't ever let me catch you saying anything like that again. I mean, the tone is crazy. Hatman said he'd never spoken to Chris Eubank Jr. before in his life. The first time he's been messaged by him, and the guy's giving him orders like some kind of drill sergeant. Imagine that. Talking to him like that, like he even has a fraction of the talent that Hatman has. Crazy. But yeah, he was basically admonishing Hatman for giving Ben Davison credit. Saying never give that much credit to somebody who just holds pads. Yeah, Eubank Jr. moving mad. The box says Eubank is right. I totally disagree. Eubank Jr. is really being hypocritical with that message because he is the most hard-headed, stubborn guy ever. And he's trying to lecture Hatman like anybody can lecture Chris Eubank Jr. His own dad can't talk to him. His own dad can't tell him nothing. All the trainers that Eubank Jr.'s had can't tell him nothing. Ronnie Davis can't tell him nothing. And his dad has been there, seen it, and done it. And he don't listen to him. But Hatman must listen to Chris Jr.? Like, give it a rest. The irony and the hypocrisy is remarkable. Now, what I will say, though, shout out to Danny, what I will say regarding Hatman, based on what I saw of him in the amateurs, he's a very instinctive fighter. Very intuitive. And a guy like that needs to be careful not to listen to his trainer too much, because trainers can get things wrong. So you don't want to listen to your trainer too much. You do want to trust your instincts to some extent when you're in that ring. And in fact, I have to big up Peter Fury on that point, because he actually said words to this effect in a recent interview. I think he might have been talking about AJ. And he said, yeah, a trainer can give you advice in the corner, but it doesn't always mean that you should follow it. You know, and that's basically what he was saying about AJ. That AJ follows his corner advice too much. There's no ability to think for himself there, no intuitive ability. And the intuitive ability of a fighter is far more important than the instructions that his corner gives him. The instructions that a corner gives him can help. Maybe a fighter is missing certain things. He's stuck in a rut a little bit. The trainer can help him get out of the rut in a particular fight. But the best fighters generally, historically, are the ones that have a great intuitive ability. And the trainer is there in, you know, like I say, when they find themselves stuck, or when maybe they're missing something, just one particular thing or two things, the trainer will just remind them, hey, do this, don't do that, etc., right? But the very greatest fighters will, at times, go against their corner's advice and be successful doing it. Obviously, one of the most famous examples would be the Rumble in the Jungle. When Muhammad Ali fought George Foreman, Angelo Dundee, I'm not sure about Bundy Brown, but certainly Angelo Dundee was imploring him to stay off the ropes. Get off the ropes, move around. Ali went back to his corner and told them all to shut up. I know what I'm doing. Evidently, he did know what he was doing. He did. Now, that's not to say that because this now sounds like it's justifying Chris Eubank Jr.'s position. This is not to say that your cornerman is just there to hold pads. No. An experienced cornerman has seen things. He understands the mindset of fighters. He's a tactician, etc., etc. He, like I say, is a second pair of eyes. And a very good trainer. You know, most of the work that a trainer does is in the gym. That's where the trainer really earns their money. During fights, when you're dealing with a great fighter, yes, the trainer's there when necessary, but the fighter themselves is going to do most of the heavy lifting and most of the thinking. The trainer's there to give reminders and keep you on a game plan if that game plan's working, so on and so forth. Or even tell you to watch out for certain things that he might suspect you're not watching out for. The box says Ben Davison's tactics are chin up, hands down, counter right hand. That's a facetious comment. Lehman Chain says, I respect Eubank's mindset. I don't respect Eubank's mindset. I think it's foolish. You know, if your own dad can't tell you anything, and he's a two-time world champion, and he had a much more, in terms of accolades, successful career than the son, if he can't tell him anything, do you know what I mean? Like, what is going on? And like I say, his own dad can't tell him anything, but then he's got the audacity to turn up in Atama's inbox and start admonishing him about giving Ben Davison any credit. That's crazy. If you don't listen to anyone, why should anyone listen to you? Long story short. That would be the question to Chris Eubank Jr. If you don't listen to anyone, why should anyone listen to you? What, are you the ultimate authority on boxing and no one else knows what they're talking about? Mr. Never won a world title? Come on. Andrew says some trainers give too much directions in the corner, probably can't remember half of it. You know who's guilty of that? In my opinion, Ronnie Shields. That's one of the reasons I never liked Ronnie Shields as a coach. Now, when a fight is going well, he doesn't overload the fighters generally with information. But when the fight is slipping away, he just bombards them with all this info and all these instructions. Like, it's a guy that experienced shouldn't be doing that. But Ronnie Shields does it time and time again. Just bombarding the guy with too much damn information. There's no way he's going to remember all that in the midst of a tough fight when he's getting punched in the head. You know? Hone in on the most important instructions. Just one or two. Drill those into the fighter's head in the corner. And then send him out for the next round. Don't give him like 10 different instructions, 10 things to remember. It's not going to happen. Big up Striker. The box says, I took it as he was bigging up Atama's talent. Well, he might have been bigging up Atama's talent, but the way that Eubank Jr., according to Atama, spoke to him was like a drill sergeant speaking to one of the recruits. Like, who the hell is Eubank Jr. to talk to Atama like that? Atama basically conveyed the fact that he was taken aback by Eubank Jr.'s tone. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't ever let me catch you. Like, who the hell are you? Do you know what I mean? To be saying, don't ever let me catch you. Crazy. Flipping crazy. You know, Eubank Jr., like his dad, is narcissistic. I actually think Eubank Jr. is more narcissistic than his dad. And that's saying something, because Eubank Sr. is pretty narcissistic. I think Eubank Jr. is actually more narcissistic. One of the things that Eubank Sr. once said about his son Chris is that he's got his mother's coldness about him. So Eubank Sr. is narcissistic, but he's also quite a sensitive character. Eubank Jr. is narcissistic, but he's cold with it. You know, there's a real lack of emotional depth there. Because look, I'm somebody that normally comes down on the side of the fighter whenever they're in a dispute with a promoter, etc. But with Eubank Jr., I reckon he's a nightmare to deal with. You know, I reckon he's actually a nightmare for promoters to deal with. Because he has such a overinflated sense of self-worth. AJ says, no way, Hatman Sr.'s way worse. I know he was actually a champ, but still, I don't think so. Eubank Sr. is more bombastic. Yeah, he's more of a showman than his son. He's more eccentric. And that might lead you to that conclusion that he's more narcissistic. But I don't think Eubank Sr., and I've spoken to Eubank Sr. I've spoken to him on the phone. I've interacted with him. I don't think Eubank Sr. is the kind of person, when he's never spoken to you before ever, to slide up in the DMs and start barking at you like a drill sergeant. Like, who the hell are you talking to? Like, at least Eubank Sr. has got some level of tact when he's communicating with someone. Yes, he's narcissistic, but he tries to communicate in an eloquent fashion and, you know, come across to some extent like a gentleman. I mean, it's a very odd caricature of an English gentleman, but, you know, there's some level of tact there. But with Eubank Jr., there's none of that. It's very blunt. There's no real thought gone into how's this person going to take what I'm about to say. Like, I followed Eubank Sr. his whole professional career, start to finish, right? You never heard him confront people the way that his son did. You know, when his son was at the table, and he's been sued by Frank Warren, I think, a couple times, making all these accusations against Warren, accusations against Hearn, accusations against Sauerland. His dad never did stuff like that. Yeah, his dad would speak out about the injustices in boxing and fighters being used by promoters, but he didn't do it to the extent where he would sit at the table and start pointing fingers and calling people scumbags. And Eubank Sr. didn't do that. He didn't go that far. But the son has gone that far. Yeah, no parliamentary procedure. There you go. Tells that he has no parliamentary procedure at all. User says, well, that's a great point. User says Eubank Jr. is definitely worse, especially when you see what he hasn't achieved indeed. Especially considering what he hasn't achieved. Yeah, with Adam Booth, though, the time he spent with Eubank Jr., I think they only had one fight together. Was it the Spike O'Sullivan fight? And knowing what I know now about Adam Booth, that was never going to end well, that particular pairing. Because Eubank Jr. is very narcissistic, he's hard-headed, he's rude, and Adam Booth is quite a sensitive character. That's one of the reasons, from what I've heard him and David Haye and George Groves say, that certainly George Groves left, or Booth left Groves, or however way round either of them wants to word it. But one of the reasons those guys split up their working relationship is because Adam Booth was quite a sensitive character. And Eubank Jr. is very insensitive. We can get the likes up, people. Shout to Sazad. 190 concurrent viewers, only 49 likes. Let's get the likes up to at least 80. In fact, let's call it 90. That's 50%. Big up Sazad, he says, Hatman, I see you are posting way more than you used to, and that's because thumbnails are easier because of ChatGPT. At 100% have you posted more, couldn't care less about ChatGPT thumbnails. Big up. Completely agree, Afro Jam. He sabotaged himself. And I think Conor Benn sabotaged himself too. That's why I was never a fan of that fight happening. Conor Benn sabotaged himself. He came out recently. Did you guys hear about this? Conor Benn came out recently and said that the Ryan Garcia fight is going to be his last at 147. That's literally admitting to you that he can't do the weight anymore. That's why he's moving up after this. It's just that this fight with Ryan Garcia is too much money to turn down. Man sabotaged himself. And I tell you what, Conor Benn would have been far more formidable at welterweight than, if he hadn't gone up in weight and if he'd actually been fighting. Because there was a period there before these talented 140-pounders started moving up. There was a period there post-Boots, maybe even post-Crawford, post-Boots, where there was an opportunity for a guy like Conor Benn. With the Brian Normans and the Lewis Crockers. Who is the other guy now that Ryan Garcia just beat? I forget his name. Those guys. There was an opportunity there for a guy like Benn, if he'd stayed at 147, to win a legitimate world title. But he messed around with his joke fight, and he's done himself in, and I reckon Eubank Jr.'s done the same. Big up, Feed Me More for the super chat, much appreciated. He says, Moses is good due to his genetics. He's the fastest heavyweight right now and will reign undefeated and retire unbeaten. Okay, that's a very big prediction. Barrios, thank you. Yeah, Mario Barrios. And Conor Benn was talking about fighting him for years, but he never did. He was chasing Eubank Jr. instead. But yeah, bold prediction by Feed Me More regarding Itama. I remember a guy who used to watch my videos. He was also a member of my Facebook group called Skylar. He was an American guy based in Vegas. Used to box amateur and whatnot. And I remember him predicting relatively early on, when Andre Ward maybe had just won the Super 6, he predicted that Ward would be like a Mayweather figure who would reign for years and retire unbeaten. Now, after he's already won Super you know, the Super, was it called a Super 6? Yeah, it was called a Super 6, I'm pretty sure. That's not as bold as saying Hatman's going to reign for years and retire unbeaten, but it's still a relatively bold prediction. But he obviously ended up being right. Now with Hatman, he's got a long way to go before he can have achieved that. And if you listen to the stuff Hatman's saying, in this interview, for example, he kept on talking about securing the bag. Hatman might be one of these guys that isn't particularly in love with boxing, but he understands that he has talent for it, and he just sees it as a job. Now, some people would class that as a major red flag, and it can be. I mean, look at Jared Anderson. It can be a major red flag. But there have been fighters, and Dwyer mentioned this a couple of months ago in a video, who went on to be all-time greats regardless and didn't particularly enjoy boxing that much. One of them being Sugar Ray Robinson. Yeah, Sugar Ray Robinson, according to all accounts, was not a guy that particularly loved boxing. It wasn't his first love. His first love was like dancing and singing and all that kind of stuff, performing, music. That was his first love, and that's what he really wanted to pursue, and he did try and pursue it. At a certain part of his boxing career, he left boxing and started doing all the tap dancing and stuff like that. But Ray Robinson was so talented, he was so good. The fact that boxing wasn't his first love didn't hinder him that much because he was so talented. And he had enough pride in himself to battle through in tough fights, you know, because sometimes when you're not really in love with boxing and you find yourself in a situation where you're getting beaten up and it's really tough in a fight, you might just pack up your tent and go home. But if you've got enough pride about yourself, even if boxing is not your first love, you're not going to do that because you don't want to hear people calling you a quitter, etc. So we'll see what happens with Hatman. There's surely going to be a time when he's up against it, and we'll see how he reacts. Yeah, that's right, Dave P. Beterbiev is famous for not loving boxing, but I don't particularly believe Beterbiev. I think Beterbiev's a bit of a troll, to be honest. I think, yeah, Beterbiev says he doesn't watch boxing, he doesn't really like boxing. I think he's being sarcastic. I think he does love boxing because, for example, Beterbiev will say something like that, and then he'll turn around and say, I'm not a very good boxer. One day I hope I can become good. He's also made comments to that effect, which is clearly sarcasm. So, yeah, I don't believe Beterbiev when he says stuff like, oh, I don't really love boxing, I don't watch it. I think it's all BS, all sarcasm. Big up Phoebe Moore for the super chat. Big up Harold Protagonist for the super chat. He says, Hatman's comments were interesting on how Ben Davison showed him he doesn't need to get hit. Could say something about his mindset when it does happen. Also, Hatman as an amateur, if you watch his fights in the European Junior Championships and also the World Championships, Hatman was more flashy as an amateur than he is now. Ben Davison has made him more refined and more technical. Hatman's style in the amateurs was more about athleticism and flash. Whereas now, they've stripped a lot of the flash away and just focused on being purely technical. That might not be the right approach for every opponent. For some opponents, they're going to need to bring out some of that flash, because with the flash comes creativity. That was one of Hatman's strengths, I think, in the amateurs. He was very creative with his moves and all that kind of thing. You don't want to make him too technical and get him to be too conventional when he has that kind of speed about him. You don't want to clip his wings as far as creativity. And basically the point I really want to make is you're going to have to get hit in certain fights. You know, there's certain fights where you're going to have to resign yourself to the fact you're going to get hit. What now? You know? And as you say, if he's convinced himself that he doesn't have to get hit, or Ben Davison has convinced him he doesn't have to get hit, how's he going to react when he does start getting hit? Especially, as somebody alluded to there, since Hatman has never lost a fight before. Dominica says, I feel that you've got to love boxing to do it, even if they don't admit it. I'm not so sure about that. I think some guys genuinely don't love it. At least not all of it. I think there are some guys that enjoy the fighting, but they don't like the training. They don't like the dieting and everything that comes as part of the package. I don't think Andy Ruiz enjoys training at all. I think he likes fighting, but I don't think he likes the gym. I don't think he likes any kind of dieting. And I think Jared Anderson is similar. Even though Jared Anderson's an athlete, I don't think the gym is his favorite place in the world, you know? I do not get that impression with him whatsoever. I do get the impression he likes to beat people up. But, yeah, I don't think he loves everything that comes with boxing. The Spartan lifestyle that you have to live. But some guys do love it. Connor Williams says, what gives it away that Ruiz doesn't like the gym, Hatman? Dave P says, I struggle to warm to Hatman. He seems very cold and monotone. Well, the primary thing I care about with fighters is how they perform in the ring. Their personality and all that kind of stuff is secondary. If they're delivering in the ring, that's what I care about the most. Anything that's endearing or entertaining about their personality is a bonus. Fernie G says, did you have a love for it, Hatman? Yes, I did. Shout out to Sek for the super chat. Big up. He says, a collie could be a good learning fight for Hatman. I think a collie could give Hatman an awkward night. I would still pick Hatman to beat him, but the source can be very awkward and frustrating. That might be the case, and the source didn't rule out a fight with Hatman at all. One thing I'll give the source credit for is he's always been willing to fight anyone. Other than maybe Richard Riakporhe, but you know, that's a different story. But last we heard of the source, he got popped for a banned substance and he hasn't been seen or heard from since. So although that might be an interesting little matchup for Hatman, obviously he's got to get past Hrgović first, and that's a very dangerous opponent. If he did, or if he does get past Hrgovic and becomes IBF heavyweight champion, he's no longer in the learning stages. And that's why I'm actually against the Tama fighting for a heavyweight title right now. I think it's too soon. Not that he can't win a world title, but you want to put a fighter in the ring for a world title if you intend them to keep hold of the title, that is, and not just give it up right away. You want to put them in the ring when you think they're ready to reign as champion. Not just win a belt, but hold on to a belt, unify, and stay at world level for the rest of their careers. I don't see the need to rush a Tama into that situation at 14-0. I don't quite get it. It seems odd to me for a Frank Warren fighter. And this is not like with Anthony Yarde, who was managed by Tunde Ajayi. Moses Tama is managed by the Warrens. I think is it George or Francis that manages him? I think it's Francis. And they normally manage fighters very, very well. So it's kind of surprising that they're throwing him into a world title fight after just 14 fights. To put things in perspective, Mike Tyson didn't do that. And in case anyone's thinking, well, Mike Tyson was fighting killers in his first 14 fights. No, he wasn't. He was fighting absolute bin men. Itama's, let's count Hrgovic, his first 15 fights contained much better fighters than Mike Tyson's first 15 fights. Now, if Lennox Lewis, his first 15 were a bit better than Mike Tyson's first 15, I think he might have fought Gary Mason in his 14th or 15th fight, who was a good fighter. He fought other guys like Jean Chanet for the European Championship, European title. But anyway, Lewis didn't challenge for the world title. Well, he became a champion. There wasn't emails back then, but you know, after winning the final eliminator against Razor Ruddock, how many fights had Lewis had by then? It was, if not over 20, at least close to 20. Tyson Fury, I think, fought Klitschko in his 23rd or 24th fight. So, you know, to be challenging for a world title in your 15th bout, it just seems a little odd when you're this kind of prospect. If you're a fighter who the promoter doesn't really believe in and they get an opportunity to cash you out in a title fight, okay, I understand that. But if you're a fighter who the promoter really does believe in, why would he put you in a title fight after 14 bouts? Unless you've had like hundreds of amateur fights, which Itama didn't have, then I just don't see why you'd do that. It's a little odd to me. Yeah, I've just addressed the point that Danny made there, and somebody else did as well. Usyk had hundreds of amateur fights. Usyk had something like 300 amateur fights. Itama had about 23. And I don't think he had a single senior bout. All of them were junior bouts. And when Usyk won his world title, he was what, in his late 20s, mid-late 20s? Itama's 21. What is the rush? I don't get it. It's weird. Yeah, the fight was scheduled without a world title, but they have petitioned the IBF to make it for a world title. That's the point, Danny. I mean, Frank Warren has admitted this. He petitioned the IBF to make it a world title. He wanted it to be a world title. Like, why? Faultline says they believe that Itama is good enough. That is why. I mean, they're experienced people, but what he does in the gym is no substitute for doing it in the ring under the bright lights with little gloves on. If you don't need to rush, then why rush at all? Do you know what I mean? Like, there is literally, I don't see any need to put Itama in a title fight in his 15th bout. I just don't see any need for it. Get him rounds before he fights for a title. Strange. Now, I'm not saying Hatman should pull out. I'm saying that the Warrens shouldn't have petitioned the IBF to make it a title fight in the first place. Now, if I was his handler, I wouldn't have petitioned the IBF to make it a title fight. I've got no issue with the Hrgovic fight. I think it's a good fight for him. But I would not be petitioning the IBF to make it a title fight. If he gets past Hrgovic, he's then got to fight Sanchez, which in some ways I think is a more dangerous fight. Because Sanchez has got the kind of hand speed and explosiveness that can come somewhere close to matching what Hatman has. He doesn't have the volume of Hatman. He's not as nimble on his feet. But in terms of like one punch explosiveness, a quick shot that can come out of nowhere and hurt you, Sanchez is in the same ballpark as Hatman, just with one explosive shot. And that presents a different type of danger. You know what? That's a good question by Where's Carlos? And that potential answer was right under my nose. How did I not think of it? Where's Carlos says, do you think they're rushing him before he loses interest in the sport? What a great question. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. And I say that because Bill Caton and Jimmy Jacobs, who were Mike Tyson's handlers. Cus D'Amato obviously was the architect of everything, but he was so old and sickly by the time Mike Tyson turned pro, it was primarily Jacobs, Caton, and Rooney that were really looking after Tyson. Cus was just overseeing everything. But Jim Jacobs and Bill Caton, obviously, they had their remit to get Mike Tyson to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history, but also they spoke to various people behind the scenes, and this has come out in documentaries. And they said that because Mike Tyson was a loose cannon in his personal life, right? They didn't want to give him the opportunity to get in trouble. They felt like if there was too much time in between fights, he was going to get in trouble with the law. So their strategy was to get him from the arena after, winning a fight and get him straight back in the gym training for another fight. If you give him too much downtime, he's going to get in trouble. He's that much of a loose cannon. So they knew the type of character they were dealing with. Maybe the Warrens know what kind of character they're dealing with Hatman. I've heard rumors about Hatman that, and it's just rumors, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard rumors from people that are kind of in the industry, and the rumor is that Hatman does like a drink, and he is a bit of a womanizer. That's not an unusual thing for a guy his age, but for a professional athlete, obviously that can become a serious distraction and can start to inhibit performances and whatnot. And when you're as talented as he is, you can fall into the trap of thinking, this won't affect me the way it affects other people because I'm just that good. So I can get away with staying up late, being with a bunch of different chicks, boozing. I mean, Mike Tyson, anyone? Isn't that what happened to him? So that's one of the word I've heard in the grapevine, is that Hatman does like a bit of a drink and a bit of a womanizer and stuff like that. Allegedly. Big up James Clifford for the super chat. He says maybe Bricktop is on the way out as a senior citizen and just wants to know he took a British prospect to heavyweight champion. Big up James Clifford. And I mentioned Cus D'Amato with Mike Tyson. A lot of people felt that way about Cus too. And in fact, Cus said it himself. Although Cus framed it in such a way that I mean, there's an interview when Mike Tyson was like 15 or 16 years of age and Cus is sat next to him. And Cus basically said that Mike Tyson is the only thing keeping him alive. And that he will stay alive to watch Mike Tyson become a success. One thing you have to understand about Cus is that he was very bitter towards the boxing establishment. Very bitter. Because he felt like he'd been frozen out. Cus D'Amato obviously grew up in the Bronx, an Italian American, and he was one of these guys that was very principled and didn't want to be under the control of the mob, who obviously were massively influential in boxing back then. And the mob stole at least one of his fighters from him. And Cus was very paranoid about the mob potentially whacking him. Very, very paranoid about it. So Cus felt like he was pushed out of the boxing industry, and a lot of the writers who maybe were on the mob payroll wrote things that were not so complimentary about him. And so when he discovered Mike Tyson, that was like Cus D'Amato's revenge on the boxing industry. That's literally the way a lot of the people close to him interpreted it, because of the way he spoke about this kid Mike Tyson and what I'm going to do and this, that, and the other. That was like his revenge on the industry. He wanted this guy to be the ultimate get back for him. And James Clifford basically saying maybe it's a similar situation for Frank Warren, although with Frank Warren, I don't really see him getting back at the industry because he's on a pretty good run as it is. But he's extremely competitive, Frank Warren, that's for sure. And maybe there's something in what you're saying. Big up James Clifford every time. I've been calling this guy Sec. That's the currency, excuse me. Apologies. Just gonna refresh the YouTube studio hub here. Give me 1 second. Funny Jupiter, excuse me. We got Funny Jupiter. Called him Sec earlier on. That's the currency. He says, from a talent perspective, I see it, but there are many differences between Usyk and Itama that should also be acknowledged. Maybe Itama will fill the shoes of Usyk, but they are big shoes to fill. Itama and Usyk are very different kind of fighters. Obviously, they're both southpaws. Itama is much more explosive than Usyk. He's naturally bigger. He hits harder. He's got faster hands. Usyk's probably got the faster feet and the better footwork all round, the more advanced footwork. There's more moving parts with Usyk. He's more technically rounded. Itama is more of an episodic, explosive fighter, whereas Usyk is more consistent with his punching. Both guys feint a lot, but Usyk feints more. And Usyk is more creative with his feints. Usyk is also more creative with his lead hand. Usyk is an absolute magician with that lead hand, the way he varies the trajectory of the jab. Sometimes he'll throw the jab as a completely straight punch. Sometimes he'll throw it as an up jab. Sometimes he'll throw it as like a jab come hook. Like the shots he hit Dubois with. He'll do so many things with his lead hand. Itama's not that advanced with a lead hand. So he's a different kind of fighter, Itama. Like I say, a more explosive, episodic fighter. And his game isn't the same as Usyk's game. Usyk's game is to keep you under constant mental stress. That's his game. Itama doesn't really do that. Itama's game is, at the moment anyway, under Ben Davison, a long-range, sharpshooting speed game where he boxes with you. Because he's so fast, he's looking to catch you with something. He's moving his feet, shifting around. He's looking for you to overcommit or have your hand in the wrong place. And he'll set the shots up. He'll hit you to the body, try and set up an opportunity to hit you to the head. Once he lands clean, then he jumps in the pocket and tries to finish you off. Usyk doesn't stand on the outside like that, relatively inactive, waiting for an opportunity to hit you with a big shot. He's straight on you. So they are different kind of fighters. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine many heavyweights of Usyk's dimensions that will be as tough as him. And that's something that people, I don't think, talk about enough, is how tough Alexander Usyk is. He's unbelievably tough. Unbelievably tough. Like, not just in terms of a good chin, but his mental resilience is crazy. And he's the kind of guy who wasn't a generational athlete. He's a good athlete, Usyk, but he's not like standout, incredible athleticism. But he's such a hard worker and he's got such a iron will that he has developed himself. I mean, he has pushed himself beyond his limits. You know what I mean? Like, the way that Usyk trains is terrifying. If torture exists in boxing, it's Alexander Usyk's training regime. You know what I mean? The way he trains is actually terrifying. Speed of Thought says Sky Nicholson is keeping Eddie Hearn going. Okay. All right. All right. Indeed, Dr. Wu. Usyk's weight to strength ratio is also amazing. Yeah, Usyk is incredibly strong for a fighter of that size. And that's really testament to the maniacal training that he does. The guy's a maniac. And that's one of the reasons that Derek Chisora changed his pick on fight week ahead of the first Luke Partridge fight. He said he thought all along he was picking Fury to win, but then he spent some time with Usyk on fight week, and he, after spending time with him, said, damn, this guy's actually nuts. He's crazy. He's literally tapped in the head. He said that Usyk, ahead of the first Fury fight, on fight week was doing like 30 or 40 kilometer bike rides in the Saudi sun, which is like 40 or 45 degrees Celsius. And he was doing all this crazy training on fight week. And he was like, no, this guy's nuts. Who the hell does that on fight week? Okay, we got an idiot in the chat here. Stop noshing your dad off. The Beaky Blinder. Stop noshing your dad off. Let's get him out of here. Weirdo. Speed of Thought says most geniuses are tapped. Funny Jupiter says, Usyk's pound-for-pound strength is great. Ringcraft is also extremely in-depth. Itama ringcraft has not been proven to be that advanced yet. Obviously, there are lots of differences between Prime Usyk and this heavyweight Usyk. I mean, there are claims about Itama's strength, although it's gym strength, and gym strength doesn't always translate to in-the-ring strength. You know, there are some guys that are very strong in the gym, but they don't look that strong in a clinch, because clinching is not just about raw strength, it's also about technique and conditioning too. But for whatever it's worth, there are people online that have been claiming, I think even members of Itama's team, I'm not sure, have claimed that Hatman can bench press a ridiculous amount of weight. Like crazy weight. Was it something insane like 180 kilos or something crazy like that? When he was 18, he was lifting 180. Like, really? At 18, lifting 180 kilos? Okay. And deadlifting crazy weight. I remember there was a South African heavyweight back in the days called Courage Shabalala. And he was a Duva fighter. And he had this amateur record, but you know, how many heavyweights are there in South Africa? Very few. You know, there was like, you can count the South African heavyweights on one hand. The two Coatsy fighters, Corey Sanders. Who else is there? Two Coatsy guys, Corey Sanders, Francois Botha. I think that's it. And then Courage Shabalala. So it's not like there was loads of South African heavyweights. But anyway, Courage Shabalala, this Duva fighter, knocked out every single one of his amateur opponents apart from one of them. I think he might have had one loss or maybe no losses, and there was just one guy that went the distance. I forget how it went now. But he had some crazy amateur record, but it was against, you know, absolute pies in South Africa who probably didn't have any boxing experience at all, you know? It's not like there was a big heavyweight scene when he was an amateur in South Africa. He's one of the... Because South African guys are generally small. Black South Africans, that is, are generally small. White South Africans are big. But black South Africans are generally small. So he was one of the few big black South Africans. Somebody mentioning Kevin Lorena. I'm talking about back in the day when Shabalala was boxing, not the guys around today. But anyway, they said that Shabalala could bench press, I forget exactly how much it was now. It was some crazy weight, like 500 pounds or something stupid, or 450 pounds. I forget what it was. And they compared him to Lennox Lewis, who apparently could bench press 350. And they said Shabalala had never lifted a weight before in his life, and he just bench pressed 450 pounds like it was nothing. But yeah, Shabalala was a very good puncher, but he had an ironic first name because he didn't have much heart. He got stopped quite a few times and called it a day. I think he trains fighters now in South Africa, Courage Shabalala. It was a big puncher, but didn't have much resilience about him. So ironic that he was called Courage. Big up President Brush for the super chat. He says, what's the most overlooked drill or skill for an amateur? Well, I think the most overlooked drill or skill, let me just start with drill, amateur or pro, is shadow boxing. What I call correct shadow boxing. Most people, in my opinion, my way of looking at it, shadow box incorrectly. The way they perform shadow boxing, most people that I see, it's like a little warm-up. You can do shadow boxing for a warm-up, but really when you're focusing on shadow boxing, no, you're not supposed to be doing it for a little warm-up. You're supposed to be building up muscle memory. So when you're shadow boxing, you need to be punching through the damn target. You need to be throwing punches with snap, with power, twisting your hips, bending your knees. When you're throwing the right hand, get on the ball of that back foot. When you're twisting into the right hand, the same with the left hook up front, get on the ball of that left foot. You need to be building up the muscle memory to punch through the target. I think one of the reasons that in some countries like Britain, there aren't that many world level punchers is because people do too much pad work. And it's the type of pad work, unlike with Manny Stewart or Kevin Rooney when he was training Mike Tyson, it's the type of pad work where the trainer does half of the work. They're bringing the pads towards the gloves, meeting the punch halfway. If you watch Kevin Rooney doing pads with Tyson, they don't do pads like that. If you watch Manny Stewart doing pads with anybody, he didn't do pads like that. The fighter has to make all of the effort. Punch through the damn target. You're not going to get people to punch through the target when you're meeting their gloves with your pads all the time. So I think too much pad work is detrimental. Okay? Or at least that type of pad work. But I think shadow boxing, correct shadow boxing, is one of the most underrated things. People don't do enough of it, and they don't do it correctly. And you need to be throwing punches when you're shadow boxing as if there's an opponent in front of you and you're trying to take his head off. When you build up that kind of muscle memory and you visualize the guy in front of you and you're punching through his head, do you know what I mean? The trajectory of your shots are finishing after, as if they're literally going through his head. You then, and you need to be doing this all the time. 12 rounds, 15 rounds, shadow boxing like that. You will see that translate into better balance when you start sparring and fighting, better power, better endurance, etc., etc. I used to do half of the shadow boxing, like say 6 rounds or 7 rounds, 8 rounds, depending on how many rounds I'm doing overall. I'll do half of the shadow boxing with gloves on, like 18-ounce gloves on, and then I'll take the gloves off and do the remainder with just my bare fist with wraps, right? Or no wraps. But shadow boxing is such an underrated thing. So underrated when it's done correctly. Big up President Brush. Wow, Coppen says, during Andre Ward's sit-down with Froch, he said he was surprised to learn UK coaches don't do shadow boxing, as Boatzy had never done it before when he joined the gym. Well, there you go. You know, a lot of trainers are just monkey see, monkey do. Whatever the trainer they learned under was doing, they just copy what he did. There's no real thought. It's just, well, copy what he did. Not that everything that the trainer they're copying necessarily was wrong, but you can at least add to it or change certain things. But a lot of the time it's just monkey see, monkey do. I was always somebody that was thinking about what I was being taught. Like, And one thing I'll say for Chris Eubanks Sr., he wasn't a massive advocate for trainers and whatnot, but one thing he did say, if you want to improve as a young fighter, study the greats. Look at what the great fighters do and try to emulate it. Now, obviously, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you might not have the ability of some of these great fighters, and so certain things they do might not suit you, might not be appropriate for you. You have to be cognizant of that. But yeah, when I was an amateur, I would look at the way Tommy Hearns threw his right hand. I would study his form, his shape. I would pause the video and look at his stance when he's throwing the right hand. And I would obsessively try to recreate that when I was on the heavy bag or hitting pads. I wanted to throw that right hand exactly like Tommy Hearns. The foot positioning, the way he would lean into the shot, everything. Just obsessing. I'd be shadow boxing all over the house. Tommy Hearns right hand, Tommy Hearns right hand. I'd be on the bag for a stupid amount of time. Tommy Hearns right hand. I'd do the same with the Mike Tyson hooks and uppercuts. You know? The Roy Jones triple left hook. I want to be able to throw a triple left hook like that. I'd obsess about how he manages to do that. Big up Funny Jupiter, he says, with Hrgović presenting a massive step up in durability, what strategic adjustments may Moses make if he cannot secure a signature early knockout? That's a great question. Big up JT Boxing. I'll come onto your super chat right after. Atama, if he can't knock Hrgović out early and he's still got gas in the tank, and it doesn't all fall apart for him, David Haye, Carl Thompson style, he's going to have to try and contain Hrgović. Settle down into boxing and try and contain him. And that's easier said than done, because Hrgović is a naturally aggressive fighter. He throws a lot of punches. He's creative with his offense. He's pretty good against southpaws in terms of landing shots. Okay, he had trouble against Zheli Zhang, but he landed plenty of his own punches, I'll tell you that. I've never bought this idea that the Zhang fight was a robbery. I watched it again recently from start to finish. That was no robbery. It was a very close fight. So Hrgović knows how to land shots against southpaws. One of the reasons I think Atama's team are taking this fight, never mind the title aspect of it, but just Hrgović as an opponent, is because Hrgović really isn't a serious puncher. He's very durable and he's a good fighter. He's creative with his offense. He's tough. Throws plenty. But he's not really a serious puncher. He thinks he's a serious puncher, but he's not. So I think they're willing to take a gamble partly because of that. I think Atama's, like I say, going to have to try and control Hrgović. And that's no mean feat because Atama is an explosive athlete. And explosive athletes tend to diminish over the course of a long fight more dramatically than marathon type athletes, which is what Hrgović is. He's a slow and steady guy rather than an episodic explosive guy. Generally, the way it goes, if the slow, steady guy gets out of the early rounds, he starts to come on strong in the second half of the fight, as long as he's not too beat up. If it gets into the second half of the fight, Atama might actually have to rely on Filip Hrgović being cut. And Hrgović is a bleeder. But Atama might actually need that if it gets into the set. He might need Hrgović to be cut up and have blood running in his eyes and stuff like that to handicap him a bit, to allow Atama to see the second half of the fight out and remain maybe in some kind of control. Because if Hrgović is fresh by the midway stage and Atama has expended a decent amount of energy, I'll tell you what, Atama could find himself in trouble. Because like I say, when you think about the body type of Atama, I'm not talking about the aesthetics, I'm talking about, the fact he's fast twitch, explosive, episodic. Those kind of guys don't have loads of volume late in fights. Do you know what I mean? They just don't. Look at Mike Tyson. He was an episodic, explosive guy. I don't think he ever stopped anyone past the 7th round in his whole career. Think about that. Mike Tyson had what? Over 50 fights? Never stopped anyone past the 7th round in his whole career. Isn't that crazy? And he went past the 7th round plenty of times. He went over 7 rounds against James Tillis. In fact, excuse me, no, he did stop somebody past the 7th round. I remember now, Jose Revolta. I think that's the only guy he ever stopped past round 7. In case there's any boffins in the chat screaming Jose Revolta. Yes, he stopped Revolta, I think, in the 10th. But other than that, he never stopped anyone past 7 rounds. So, didn't stop Tillis after 7. Didn't stop Mitch Green after 7. Didn't stop Bone Crusher Smith, Tony Tucker. Obviously, Buster Douglas. Razor Ruddock in the second fight. Then there was Holyfield in the first fight, etc., etc. Basically, if you went if you got to the 7th round against Mike Tyson and you're a decent heavyweight, you're probably going to go the distance. Because explosive guys like that, who are like sprinters in boxing form, they lose so much juice off their shots and the volume drastically goes down later on in the fight. Big up Funny Jupiter. It's a great question. Long story short, I think Atama might have to cut Hrgovic to keep him under control if he can't get him out of there early. Big up JT Boxing. He says, big up Hatman, I see a video AJ put up on his Insta story of him walking through an empty park with the Surface music on. AJ is such an odd guy. Oh, excuse me, Scarface music on. Why did I read it as Surface? Scarface music on. AJ is such an odd guy, bro. Yeah, he's very odd. I don't really know what AJ's obsession is with gangsters. I do find that to be strange. AJ's obsessed with all these gangsters. Big Meech and Scarface, and he watches all these gangster series and stuff like that. I don't know what that's all about, bro. Very odd. Shout out to JT Boxing. Harrow Protagonist says the step up from Franklin to Hrgovic is crazy. It is a big step up. It is a big step up, but I don't think it's an unreasonable step up. Again, because Hrgovic isn't really a big punch. You know, there's some power there, but he's not a serious puncher. So I think it's a risk worth taking. Indeed, Uncle Lenzo. 40-year-old, well, he's not quite 40. I guess he's 36. But yeah, I get your point. Millionaire and he looks up to Big Meech. It is very odd. Looney Classic says, I can relate to AJ. I am obsessed with gangsters too. See, the thing about gangsters is that through movies and these days true crime podcasts and stuff like that, gangsters are romanticized. But once you apply critical thinking and, you know, you don't get attached to these ex-mobsters and gangsters in an emotional way and just look at it all objectively. The criminal underworld is, and this should be obvious to everyone, an absolute cesspool. And the characters that you're going to find in there are unbelievably dishonest. Just a bunch of psychopaths and extreme narcissists embellishing their own stories, always the hero in their own story, you know? And look, I'm a civilian, so I don't care about the whole ratting thing or whatever the case may be. But these guys, So many of them. And anyone who's even been mildly involved in street life and you grew up in certain environments, you'll know that so many of the top guys are police informants. That's part of the game. The ones who get exposed are just the tip of the iceberg. What you think that it's only Sammy Gravano and, you know, this, that, and the other people that got eventually exposed? No. There are loads of police informants who are high-level mobsters, cartel bosses, and all this kind of stuff that never get exposed. But they're absolutely government informants working for the intelligence agencies and all sorts of stuff. That's the game. So there's no, as they say, there's no honor among thieves. It's just such a cesspool. I don't know why anyone would want to be involved in that kind of life once you realize what it really is. Strip away all the ridiculous romanticization. It's like the worst dregs of human society in terms of morality competing against one another. I don't know why people see that as anything aspirational, for one. Dear, oh dear. Yeah, that's a great point there. Speed of Thought says, the mob used to extort the honest business owners in their neighborhoods. See, that's one of the bits of absolute BS that the mob and the mob's fanboys among the public used to claim. Oh, the mob only kill each other. They only bother other gangsters. What I will say is, most of the people that the mob unalived were other gangsters and criminals, yes. But they did also unalive civilians as well. Oh, that absolutely happened. And more often than unaliving civilians would be beating up civilians and extorting civilians, intimidating civilians. They did that an awful lot. Because civilians who are from these mob neighborhoods know who the mobsters are. So the mob, in most cases, are not going to have to unalive the civilians because civilians are shook. They're scared. Whereas when they're going up against other criminals, they might have to unalive them because those criminals are going to cross certain lines and they think they're tough guys too. Do you know what I mean? But all this romanticization about, oh, the mob never touched civilians. What a load of absolute nonsense. Like, the mob were, for one, doing armed robberies. And when they're sticking up these places, who are the security? Civilians. Who are the staff? Civilians. They would muscle their way into, you know, businesses and stuff like that. If you were the owner of a bar or a restaurant and the mob take a liking to that bar or restaurant, you're cooked. Do you know what I mean? You are cooked. You might as well sell up. So the romanticization is like ridiculous. I mean, you look at a guy like Sammy Gravano as an example. Sammy Gravano, I mean, the audacity of that guy, right, who tries to justify snitching by claiming that John Gotti was going to, well, basically, he tried to say that John Gotti told him to take the rap and said that the boss needs to be out of prison. He can't be in prison. So Gotti was trying to pressure him to take the rap for him. That's what he claims. And then he says he heard the tapes where Gotti was basically planning to whack Gravano. And he uses that as a justification for breaking the oath, right? But what he doesn't tell you is that he ratted on like over 30 people. and it's worse still. Sammy Gravano had most of his friends whacked. He was part of having most of his closest friends and associates unalived. That's the kind of character he was, and he is. His best friend in the mob for years was a guy called Louis Melito. Louis Melito was like Gravano's #1 trigger man. And Gravano had him unalived. Gravano had his own brother-in-law unalived. And after unaliving his own brother-in-law, and his wife was upset, because his wife didn't know that he was part of it. Where's my brother? He's missing. He was consoling his wife. Don't worry about it. I'll find out what happened to him when he was part of doing it. Those are the kind of characters that inhabit the criminal underworld. Like, hell no. The worst human beings in the world. There's nothing glamorous about that. I mean, you're dealing with demons. The most backstabbing, conniving, snaky. And this is the thing about the criminal underworld. The further up you go in that world, the more snaky, backstabbing, devious, and duplicitous people become. If there's anyone with any integrity, it's going to be the lowest level of the criminal underworld. That's where you'll find some semblance of integrity. But the further you go up the pyramid of power, you just meet more and more psychopathic, snaky, backstabbing, and ultimately people that are all just, informants on some level. And they'll unalive people for being informants, expose people for being informants, while they themselves are informants. Like that. So who the hell wants to be part of that? Who the hell would want to be part of that? Big up Copzilla. He says, did you encounter gangsters when bouncing on doors? Yes, I did. I worked for gangsters bouncing on doors. Never mind just encountering them. I worked for them. I spoke about some of them, at least one of them, in my Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. My first job as a bouncer was working for a gangster. Shout out to the box. He says, Nigel Benn's association with the Essex Boys, steroids, ? Well, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of accusations about Nigel Benn and steroids following the McClellan fight. The sister and other people claimed that there was residue found on a boot, and when it was tested, it was steroids, but I don't know whether there's any validity to that, because there's contamination and, when you're taking a sample of somebody's fluids, any kind of fluid from someone, it can't have been dried up on a boot. Do you know what I mean? Because all sorts of stuff can happen at a chemical, molecular level to invalidate that sample. Then there was the claim that when they came to test Nigel Benn in the locker room after the McClellan fight, he collapsed. Well, he would collapse legitimately because he took a terrible beating in that fight. He obviously won the fight, but Nigel Benn's jaw was swollen to the size of a melon. He spent at least a week in hospital. He was urinating blood for, I think, 2 weeks. All right, so he took a terrible pasting in the fight despite winning. He must have been terribly dehydrated and all sorts. So maybe he was on something and he pretended to faint to get away from the testing. Or maybe it was genuinely because it was such a brutal fight. Who knows? But yeah, certainly Nigel Benn was around some very shady characters on that Essex scene. And one way that you actually come across shady characters, I'm not saying all people with this background are shady, but you do come across some very shady individuals that come from a military background. Yeah? In most countries, there are only 2 places where you can unalive someone legally. One, well, maybe 3 places. 1 is in the military, 2 is in the police, and 3 is in a boxing ring. Those are the 3 places you can unalive someone legally. And so those who aren't good at boxing and they desperately want to unalive someone but don't want to spend decades in prison for it, some of them join the military. You know, some people are hell-bent on unaliving other human beings. I'm not saying most people in the military are like that, but some of them are. And once they come out of the military, some of them go into the criminal underworld. I mean, that's a well-known thing. Same with the police. There are loads of examples of ex-police officers that became gangsters, and also ex-soldiers that became very serious figures in the criminal underworld. And I say all that because Nigel Benn was in the military. And I don't think all the people that he met in the military were choir boys, you know what I mean? And he was hanging around a rough crowd. So shout out to the box for the super chat. Shout out to Funny Jupiter for the super chat. He says, AJ should make a gangster movie about how America got bamboozled by the Gypsy King. I would watch that. You know, as far as Scarface, I could understand for one fight or another fight or a random post on social media, a boxer or anyone invoking Tony Montana. Not that they're trying to pretend that they're a gangster, but, you know, it's just like the mood they're in. They feel like a boss, and Tony Montana was a boss, right? It's like a metaphor for the challenges that you face in life. But with AJ, it doesn't just stop walking through the park playing Scarface music. He's constantly talking about gangsters all the time. Big Meech and this gangster and Pablo Escobar, and he watches all these gangster series, and now he's been watching The Sopranos. He's like obsessed with gangsters. But yeah, somebody needs to make a documentary about how America got bamboozled by the Gypsy King. Well, I think it's important to know about the criminal underworld, especially the higher levels of it, because then you'll get a more holistic understanding of how society works. Because if you go high enough up in the criminal underworld, it basically merges with the state. Oh, yes, it does. In most countries anyway. You go high enough up in the criminal underworld, it merges with the establishment. So that's why it's good to have some level of understanding about it. But in terms of these people who are obsessed with gangsters and they deify gangsters, and that's weird stuff to me. Because these are like the most horrific human beings on earth. You wouldn't want to be around them, you know? 100% Triple R. 100%. See, a lot of these extreme psychopaths are the upper echelons of the drug trade. These people are capable of anything. So when you hear them, guys like that, who are clearly very extreme psychopaths, coming out, sitting on the high horse about certain other types of criminals, spitting on them and all, I don't buy any of it. They're just trying to manipulate the public into thinking that they have some baseline level of morality. They don't. And as Triple R said there, a lot of them have either committed those kind of crimes themselves and gotten away with it, or they're at least capable of doing stuff like that, because a psychopath has no conscience. They don't have the ability to put themselves in the shoes of a victim, to think about the consequences of their own actions inflicted upon other people. They lack that human fail-safe mechanism. So they're capable of anything. It doesn't mean they'll necessarily do anything, but they're capable of it on an emotional level, right? Because they just don't have any sense of empathy at all. Nor do they have any genuine sense of morality. That's all just window dressing. You got Jake Jones. Says, yes, Hatman, long time. I'm always catching up on your vids. You noticed another thing AJ does? He's always shadowboxing when talking with someone for an interview. Such a weirdo. Yeah, I've noticed that too. AJ is a very, very odd character. Very odd. Now, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but these are some of the things that I contemplate. There are many cultures and spiritual belief systems that incorporate the concept of reincarnation. Now, with this, especially if you look at like Eastern spirituality, you know, India and some extent, you know, the Far East as well, there's the concept of souls reincarnating and basically maturing after each reincarnation cycle. And so you look at a guy like AJ, well, for example, there's things like deja vu, and some people speculate that deja vu is caused by having actually lived this life before, a different version of it, or maybe you're living this life in a parallel universe slightly differently to the way you're living it in this one. There are many theories about why people get deja vu. But anyway, just sticking with those Eastern religions and spiritual traditions that deal with reincarnation. The more times you reincarnate, the more your spirit matures, the more experience it gets. And this helps with your intuition. So, a very experienced soul that has reincarnated loads of times will generally have greater intuition than an inexperienced soul. If any of that is an actual reality, then maybe AJ's a guy who's an inexperienced soul. That's why he lacks the intuition of some of the other fighters. He comes across as somewhat naive, doesn't he, AJ? Despite all of his experience now as a professional boxer, he comes across as a naive guy, at least with regards to boxing, which is really strange. So maybe he was just, if there is such a thing as reincarnation, maybe he's just an inexperienced soul. Maybe he's on his first go-around on a reincarnation cycle. So everything's new to him. He hasn't built up enough experience to have intuition. Yeah, there are some very dangerous people in the military. I'm not saying the majority of them. I don't think it's the majority. But there's certainly a minority who are very, very dangerous. Psychopaths that go into the military. There was a story, maybe you guys can Google it and find out about it, but it ended up on a mainstream documentary, I want to say back in the 90s. And it was these 3 ex-British military guys who are, they'd had, I think, extensive careers in the military. And they might have even been in special forces. I can't remember now. Anyway, these 3 military guys came out of the military, but they were still hungry for some action. So they joined, I think, a mercenary company. And they went out, I think, somewhere in Asia. And they were told that they could see some action down there and get to unalive some people. Some, I don't know, enemy combatants, some rebels or something. And so these 3 guys went down there. They were, pottering around in the jungle, hoping to be able to find some people to unalive. And they couldn't find anyone. These are 3 British guys. One of the guys that they were with, somehow, some way, was annoying the other 2. And so you know what they did when they couldn't find any action? They unalived him. They unalived one of the guys, the British guys that they went there with. They were so bloodthirsty and desperate to unalive someone, they were like, he'll do. So there's some very, very dangerous people. Shout out to JT Box, and he says, why do you think AJ gets so much stick? I don't get it. The guy fought Klitschko in his 19th fight. Who the hell did Wilder fight in his 19th fight? Well, one thing I can tell you is that the narrative of AJ being protected his whole career, I've always found to be totally bizarre. Because far from being protected, he was fast-tracked. Long before he was ready. He was thrown in at the deep end. Now, when I say thrown in, he had to consent to it. But it was really a continuation of what he did in the amateurs. Because AJ had very little experience by the time he qualified for the World Championships in Azerbaijan. But he just rolled the dice and had a go. And he ended up getting to the final, where he lost a very narrow decision to an Azerbaijani fighter in front of their president. So he was a gambler in that way. He would just roll the dice and listen to his coaches and see how well he could do. Like a bit of a chancer. And so he continued in that same spirit once he turned professional. When the Hearns, Eddie and Barry suggested putting him in there for a world title, I guess AJ was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Because they wanted to make big money out of him as soon as possible. Then it was Klitschko, and AJ's like, yeah, let's do it. So he just seemed to be in this spirit of rolling the dice and listening to the people around him and not saying no. So, far from being protected, he was rushed. And who did AJ actually duck? Oh, he ducked Deontay Wilder and Fury. No, he didn't. That's absolute nonsense. Fury was offered the fight with AJ several times. So was Wilder. I mean, DAZN got involved and offered Wilder career high money So the fact that people still, to this day, are parroting this narrative that AJ was protected and he ducked everyone, it's really strange because that literally didn't happen. So no idea what that's all about, but when people get a particular idea in their heads, they can stubbornly cling to it even when all the evidence contradicts it. I give AJ a lot of credit for trying to be great. He didn't turn out to be great, but he tried. He gave it a go. I also give him credit, and Eddie Hearn, for revitalizing boxing, particularly the heavyweight division. And I've mentioned this in previous videos. All this talk about, oh, without Tyson Fury, none of it would have been possible. That's total nonsense. How the hell is it all because of Tyson Fury? Oh, no. He went over to Germany and beat Klitschko. Oh, yeah. Klitschko was 38 or 39 when Fury beat him. That means that Klitschko was coming to the end and he was going to lose to somebody else if it weren't Fury anyway. Case in point, AJ beat him 18 months later. So he was going to lose anyway. Fury just happened to be the first guy to get to him of the new generation. But someone else was going to, either Klitschko was going to retire within 2 years of that, 2015. He was either going to retire within 2 years or someone was going to beat him for the titles. One of the two. So the new era with AJ and Wilder and Fury, Parker, all these guys, Dylan White, Chisora, that was inevitable. That was going to happen whether Fury beat Klitschko or not. So Fury gets way too much, by some people anyway, credit for the revival of the heavyweight division. Maybe he brought it about a little earlier, maybe 18 months, 2 years earlier than it would have happened, possibly, but that's it. It was going to happen anyway, Fury or no Fury. Really, the biggest gratitude needs to go to Anthony Joshua and Eddie Hearn for bringing the interest back to the heavyweight division. They did a fantastic job. And a rising tide lifts all boats. AJ and Hearn lifted everyone in the heavyweight division financially. That's what they did. They lifted the whole sport, at least in Britain. So they deserve a lot of credit for that. Obviously, AJ has a lot of shortcomings. Did not turn out to be a great fighter. But he did a lot of good for the sport, no doubt. Big up JT Boxing. Shout out to Funny Jupiter. He says, put current heavyweight boxers into the Batman Dark Knight. So Tyson Fury would be Harvey Two-Face. Batman's probably going to be Usyk. Who would AJ be? Commissioner Gordon? I don't know. Maybe he'd be Commissioner Gordon. I'm not sure. But Fury definitely Harvey Two-Face. Kayvon Green says, you don't think AJ's a great fighter? No. Not by my definition of a great fighter. A great fighter to me is somebody who's like a generational great. Somebody that would have been a champion in any era. Would have been one of the very top guys in any era. I don't see AJ like that. I think AJ was a decent champion, but he's not an all-time great. AJ never dominated at any period during either of his championship reigns, He was always on shaky ground the whole time. Where's the AJ performance in a big fight where he really shone? There never was one. I say Sean, where he really dominated against a peak, dangerous guy. He doesn't have that kind of performance. Fury's got a performance like that. In the second Wilder fight. Usyk's got performances like that. AJ don't have any performances like that. Wilder don't have any performances like that either. Who would the Joker be? Who's an agent of chaos in the heavyweight division? Deontay Wilder? Derek Chisora? But Derek Chisora's not a major enough figure to be the Joker. Big up JT Boxing for the super chat. He says, what do you think of Froch's criticism of AJ? I feel like it comes from a bitter jealousy he has for Joshua, never has a nice word to say about the guy. I agree. I think that Froch has always been kind of nasty and bitter towards Amir Khan, and to a lesser extent, AJ as well. There's something personal with both of those guys. With AJ, I suspect it's because of Rob McCracken. It's because of the fact that Froch doesn't like the way AJ fired McCracken. I think that's where it all started. After that, that's when Froch started getting way more critical. And I think he's had it in for AJ ever since then. And yeah, maybe there is an element of jealousy too. You know, Froch is quite a narcissistic guy. So maybe there's an element of jealousy. But that element of jealousy would have been there all along, but kept under wraps because AJ and McCracken were still working together. But then maybe the jealousy that was always there came out once AJ got rid of McCracken. Arco says maybe his missus was moving to AJ somewhere at some event. Well, that's what happened with Khan, right? Khan thought that AJ was smashing his missus. And Khan took to social media saying that AJ can have her and all this kind of... I mean, how wild is that? How embarrassing for an Asian family. You know, like, Asian families are not used to airing their dirty laundry out like that. Like the way white families or black families in the West might do. Asian families are a lot more conservative and there's a lot more family conservatism and pride associated with it. So for a pair of Asians to come out like that, you know, the wife and Khan and start, I mean, that's just crazy. That is crazy. There was an Asian guy, you know, around that time when there was the whole Khan and his wife controversy with AJ, there was an Asian guy in my Facebook group who, and he said this without any sarcasm. He said, both of them, as in Khan and his wife, need to be unalived. And he used the word honor illing, right? I'm not going to say it for the sake of the algorithm, but you know, there's the concept in on the Indian subcontinent. It comes from there, and not just there. There's even in the Middle East, but I want to say it's most prevalent with people from the Indian subcontinent. The concept of honor unaliving, when you've dishonored your family, you can be unalived for it. And this guy was saying Khan and his wife need to be unalived in that tradition. You know what I mean? I was like, whoa. Because their culture takes things like that very seriously. You don't do things to shame the family and, you know. So what Khan and his wife were doing was wild. Especially Khan. Khan's been doing way too much for years. Way too much. That's right. Yeah, AJ fired back with "It Wasn't Me" by Shaggy. I remember that. That was actually banter by AJ there. Banter. Funny Jupiter says Atama can be Robin to Usyk's Batman. I think AJ looks more like Robin to Usyk's Batman at this point, doesn't he? Put himself fully under Usyk's wing. Okay, Looney Classics is making the case for Derek Chisora being the Joker. It says Derek and the Joker are both ridiculous characters who talk big and end up getting beaten, but they always come back with a promise to do something that's never been seen before. Okay. You're making a case. Derek's definitely crazy like the Joker. He's definitely an agent of chaos. Dr. Wu said, I heard Khan got robbed late in East London. Yeah, he did. It was on film. Khan was robbed a few times. He got robbed in Birmingham. He got robbed in Leighton. Those are the 2 times that I know of. So someone says Khan's chin is still in recovery. Who's the Penguin? Spencer Brown. Call him the Penguin or call him Clandestino. JT says, what was going through your head, Hatman, when Hay bottled Chisora? That still gives me a few good laughs. He glassed me. Yeah, that was hilarious. The videos I did in response to that got crazy views. They went viral. That was hilarious. What else did Derek Chisora say? I'm going to physically shoot David Hay. Looney Classic says, is the UK still a superpower? Do you mean in boxing? Or in geopolitics? In geopolitics, obviously not. Obviously not. In boxing, I guess it is in the heavyweight division. Yeah, I remember that. Man was saying he'll shoot Hay physically, not mentally. Do I think Derek Chisora is a psychopath? No, I don't think he's a psychopath. That's right. Don Charles's cap went flying when David Haye punched him. And Haye broke his jaw. Don Charles is still salty about that even now. It's crazy. All these years later, Don Charles is still bitter about David Haye breaking his jaw. And it was crazy. Don Charles lost, I don't know what it was, 2 stone in a month because he had to have his jaw wired, right? So he was on liquids the whole time he had his jaw wired. David Haye did him a favor. Man needed to shed a bit of weight. Dear, oh dear. Man broke his jaw and put him on a crash diet. Every cloud has a silver lining. Why do I not cover Inoue? I do cover Inoue. Not as much as I cover some other fighters, but I do cover him. I've spoken about many of his fights over the years. The truth be told, those lighter weights are generally not as interesting. Shout to Sean. Says, watching you with my son. He is 40 kilos Scottish champ. We love watching your vids. Keep on smashing it. Big up. Shout out to the Scotland crew. Who is Alfred? Sergey Lapin. In fact, it would have been... why have I forgotten his name? Usyk's promoter for so many years. How have I forgotten his name? He used to do all the interviews and everything. Chubby guy. Not fat, but a little chubby. What's that guy's name that was part of Usyk's team that was like the main guy in Usyk's team for years? He'd be Alfred. What's his name? Why have I forgotten his name? Somebody remind me, please. No, not Igor. Krasuk, thank you. Alex Krasuk, yes. He would be Alfred. Alex Krasuk. David Clark says, do you think Joseph Parker still has another world title run in him? I'm still trying to understand what in the world Joseph Parker was thinking in that Fabio Wardley fight. His tactics were so bizarre. Very, very strange. Now, some people might argue, well, his tactics were the same as Dubois' tactics against Fabio Wardley. Yeah, but Parker don't punch as hard as Dubois, and Parker's got legs that Dubois doesn't have. As in lateral movement and the ability to move about and just outbox someone more cleanly. He's more fluid than Dubois. But somehow Joseph Parker went in there like a man possessed, trying to engage in a shootout with Wardley from the get-go. Like, what in the world was all that about? He should have just gone in there nice and calm and outboxed Wardley over 12 rounds. There's no need to go in there and try and knock him out. That's where you give Wardley an opportunity. So I just don't understand where Joseph Parker's head was at in that Fabio Wardley fight. Maybe he was on the sniff. He obviously got popped, but maybe he was high on the night of the fight, bro. I mean, seriously. The way he was fighting was so strange. A guy of his experience. Unbelievable. So, if he can stay off the sniff and box sensibly, then maybe he does have another title run left in him. What is he, 34? Big up Striker. Someone says Partridge sabotage. There you go. Truth Channel says at least Parker gets another sniff at a world title. Bum bum. Yeah, I saw the Term Warner fight. If you can even call it a fight. Dear, oh dear. They seriously need to step him up, but judging by what Hearn said post-fight, it doesn't seem they're going to be doing that anytime soon. He was talking about matching Term Warner next against the guy that beat Savage, who was almost equally as awful, or who is almost equally as awful. Hearn's excuse is nobody in Australia wants to fight Term Warner. Well, then box him outside of Australia. You're a British promoter. Put him on a British show. You're not limited to Australian opponents. What's he talking about? Joseph Parker, a New Zealander, fought plenty of times in Britain. Bruno says, what happened to Alan Babich? He's gone missing. He actually did an interview the other day. If you just search on YouTube, Alan Babich, and filter the videos to this week, you'll see an Alan Babich video pop up. He's all jacked now. He's been pumping weights. He says he's making a comeback. He's convinced himself the reason he went out the way he did against Johnny Fisher, and prior to that, the way he went out against Rosansky, is because he'd been training too much. That's what he's told himself. He said he's changed up his style a little bit. AKA he's going to try and box a little bit more. It's too little, too late. Getting chinned and around by Johnny Fisher. It's never a good look, is it? Yeah, I spoke about Gradus Kraus. It's not Albert Kraus, it's Gradus Kraus. Unless Albert is his middle name or something. Or is Albert his first name and Gradus is... I don't know, but he's known as Gradus Kraus. Spoke about him in a previous stream. Went through his amateur record. He's got some talent there, but I think Peter and Ben Shalom, his promoter, are laying the hype on ridiculously thick. Like ridiculously thick. You'd expect him to because they're his team. But as outsiders looking in, as boxing fans, we need to cut through hype and look at what is actually there. And if you look at Gradus Kraus's amateur record, yeah, he was experienced as an amateur, but he lost nearly half his fights. So that should put things into perspective, at least the fights that are listed on BoxRec, because he might have had other fights that aren't listed on there. But of the fights that are listed on BoxRec, he lost nearly half of them. So all of this talk from Ben Shalom about, oh, he's got this incredible amateur record and Gradis Krause is the best light heavyweight in the world and he's going to become undisputed, and pump the brakes. You know what I mean? To me, and I described him this way on the live stream the other day, to me, Gradis Krause looks like a slightly less fluid version of Willie Hutchinson who punches harder. So a harder punching, but less fluid version of Willie Hutchinson. That's Gradis Krause, as far as I can tell right now. That's what it looks like to my eyes. I don't think his power is anywhere near as crazy as Ben Shalom is making it out to be. But again, that's his promoter. He's paid to promote and hype things up, to amp up the set. Big up Christine. Hatman, do you believe the Brook rumors more than Lennox? 100%. I mean, the Brook stuff, if you've heard the infamous voice note, it's a slam dunk. It's a slam dunk. The voice note is on my Patreon page, by the way. If anyone ain't heard it, sign up for the boxing tier, look up Brook voice note. It's right there on the Patreon page. You can download it and everything. So, yeah, I 100% believe what is said about Kell Brook. I mean, completely. 100%. Not even any shadow of doubt in my mind as far as the Brook rumors. Because I've just heard it from too many different people. I was given that voice note years ago, long before Khan came out and made the accusations against Brook, long before most people were even talking about it. Somebody from Sheffield that was a longtime member of my Facebook group DM'd me. And when he DM'd me, he was telling me, before he sent me this voice note, do not tell anyone that you got this from me. Please don't, please promise me that what I give you here, don't tell anyone that you got this from me. Because some of the people that are implicated in this voice note are dangerous people in Sheffield, like gangsters. And they might be able to put two and two together and figure out that you got it from me, you know, etc., etc. Anyway. So he was very cautious, but he gave me this voice note, and I listened to it, and I was like, whoa. The detail, there's far too much detail in there, as far as I'm concerned. And the way the guy told the stories, it was way too convincing, as far as I'm concerned, to be made up. And far too consistent with certain public information. But it's a guy basically in a WhatsApp group who gives a voice note that might be 5 minutes long or more, where he gives backstory to a bunch of incidents that Kell Brook has been involved in. And I'm completely convinced by it, not just because of what is said in the voice note, but because of who I got it from. Somebody from Sheffield that knows a lot of those people. And this is way back in the days before any of these rumors even started circulating on YouTube anyway. So no, I'm 100% convinced about Brook. Totally. I don't have any doubts at all that the stuff about Brook is true. What was the voice note? As I say, it was a guy from Sheffield, clearly with a very strong Sheffield accent, talking to people in a WhatsApp group and filling them in on stuff that Kell Brook has been involved in. There was a car accident that Kell Brook was involved in, and he gives backstory to why that happened. And it's a crazy story as to why that car accident happened, like bizarre. He gives backstory to the incident in Spain. He gives backstory to the Errol Spence fight. He talks about Johnny Nelson and some other Sheffield characters in the voice note, Johnny Nelson's wife and Johnny Nelson and certain gangsters and whatnot in Sheffield that are involved in this whole milieu. Yeah. Eldon Joe says, was it Boxing King Media? Definitely not. Definitely not. It weren't Boxing King Media. Boxing King Media has got a very distinctive Asian twang to his accent and voice. Now, the guy in the voice note was possibly Asian, but the twang to his voice was nowhere near as obviously Asian as Boxing King Media. So I don't think it's Boxing King Media at all. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. And especially after what this guy in the voice note said about Johnny Nelson, there's no way that it can be Boxing King Media. Because Boxing King Media does interviews with Johnny Nelson all the time. And the way that he blows Johnny Nelson up in that voice note, there's no way Johnny Nelson will want to do interviews with him after that. So no, I don't think it's Boxing King Media. The voice note is on my Patreon page. I don't know if someone has uploaded it to YouTube. You can look up Kel Brook voice note on YouTube, see what comes up. But one place you're sure to find it is on my Patreon page. No, there's no rumors about Johnny Nelson in that regard. But there's stuff about Johnny Nelson and Johnny Nelson's wife that is said in that voice note. I'll leave it there. We got Funny Jupiter for the super chat. He says, I think Billy Nelson overhyped Sherman Klump to cash in on him as early as possible, which is why he agreed to the Parker fight on short notice. Bacoli's gone into hiding since the Ajagba fight. Yeah, so Ben Shalom was speaking about Martin Bacoli on the most recent episode of Simon Jordan's podcast on TalkSport. And he painted a picture of a guy in Martin Bacoli who's not really committed to boxing, who's been given opportunities to fight since the Ajagba match, but has turned them down. And Ben Shalom kind of alluded to Zuffa basically being interested in signing Martin Bacoli. And I'm assuming it was Zuffa. I don't think he said that explicitly, but the way I've interpreted it is he was implying it was Zuffa. But he's blocking it legally. Ben Shalom is. He still thinks that Piccoli is contractually bound to him. So, I don't know, it seems as though maybe they're in litigation or something like that. Piccoli and Ben Shalom. So I mean, Martin Piccoli, weirdly, I think it might have been after the Ajagba fight, said that if he doesn't get a title shot within 12 months, he's going to retire. I think the biggest problem in Martin Piccoli's career, aside from his own gluttony and lack of discipline, I think the biggest problem for him has always been Billy Nelson. I don't think Billy Nelson has done a good job as a manager for him, to be honest. We got Funny Jupiter. Yeah, Billy Nelson overhyped him to high heaven. Not that Martin Piccoli didn't have ability. He always had some ability. But Billy Nelson with the sparring stories and all that kind of stuff and just crazy hype talk took it to another level and built up the expectations about Martin Piccoli to a point which it was perilous. You know, how could he possibly live up to expectations like that? I do think Piccoli is maybe a bit of a wasted talent. But yeah, he just doesn't live the life. And maybe he's an example of what we were talking about earlier on. Somebody that has a certain amount of talent for boxing, but doesn't really love it. Indeed, Funny Jupiter, against Parker like that, and I think Billy Nelson only wanted to cash in on Piccoli 100%. Piccoli seems like a very, very loyal person when it comes to Billy Nelson, unless Billy Nelson's got dirt on him or something, I don't know, but the loyalty that Piccoli seems to have to Billy Nelson is quite interesting, isn't it? Because if you heard what Piccoli said regarding the Parker fight, he said that Billy Nelson contacted him regarding fighting Joseph Parker. And he said, "Coach, I'm not in shape. And they want me to fight in whatever it is, 48 hours. What do you think I should do?" And Billy Nelson says, "You should take the fight." Martin Piccoli said, "Well, I can't say no to coach." That's the way he described it. I'm paraphrasing here, but words to that effect. He said, "I couldn't say no to coach." So I just did what he suggested. So he believes in Billy Nelson's judgment to an extreme degree, apparently. And I think that's been to his detriment. Big up Funny Jupiter. All right, peeps, gonna shut this one down. Been streaming for a good while now, nearly 3 hours. So we'll call it a day there. You know the drill. Big up everyone for tuning in and joining the conversation. I'd like to give a special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. They were Feed Me More Zone, Harold Protagonist, Funny Jupiter, James Clifford, President Brush, JT Boxing, Colpzilla, The Box, Christine Swaby. Much appreciated to you guys for the extra support. Until next time, take care out there, gang. Be good. I'll catch you on the other side. I'm out.